Hello everybody. These notes are going to cover air masses. The notes that you have are air masses and fronts together, but just for today, these notes are going to cover only the air masses, which is the first page. So an air mass is a large body of air that has similar temperature and moisture properties throughout. It forms over a particular region, and that region's own moisture and temperature characteristics define what the air mass's temperature and moisture characteristics are going to be. So there are 5 types of air masses in total, the first 2 shown here. They have an abbreviation of CP and CT. Capitalization matters. The first letter refers to the moisture content, which is essentially where does it form over? Is it forming over land or over water? C stands for continental. Continental refers to land. So this air mass forms over land, and if it forms over land, it's going to be dry. Polar and tropical refer to the temperatures. So polar, I think you guys should know, polar refers to cold. So a continental polar air mass is going to be a dry and cold air mass. And these usually form over central Canada and is what graces us in the winter times. A CT, little c capital T air mass, is a continental tropical air mass. Those usually form over Mexico, and those tend to be dry and warm. What I'd like you to add is what has just popped up. Make an arrow, make 2 arrows, one pointing to central Canada, one pointing to Mexico, and label those source regions. Those are the defining areas that define the characteristics of the air mass. And I'd like you to also write right here where it says source regions give the air masses their characteristics. Our remaining 3 air masses, we have the MT, which is maritime tropical. Maritime refers to water. So if we have an air mass forming over water, there's going to be a lot more evaporation, so there's going to be more moisture in there. And if it's tropical air mass, it's forming over a warm ocean, so the air mass is going to be wet and warm. A maritime polar air mass, again, maritime is wet, polar is cold, so this is going to be a wet and cold air mass. And then our continental Arctic air masses form in the tundras, so those are very high latitudes. These are going to be dry and very cold. We typically don't feel too much of the continental Arctic. Maybe every once in a while that polar vortex dips down from Canada, that might be what we're feeling, but usually we're pretty happy with just getting the continental polar air mass. So again, those are your source regions. Source regions give the air masses their characteristics. Now, you are not responsible for remembering the symbols and the names of the air masses. Those are on page 13 of your reference table. What you are responsible for remembering is, okay, continental means land. That means it's a dry air mass. Maritime means water. That means it's wet. Polar means it's cold. Tropical means it's warm. So, I honestly believe capitalization and the order that you put the terms matters. So the first letter always refers to continental or maritime, and that's lowercase. The second letter always refers to the temperature and is capitalized. And since it's in your reference table, there's really no excuse for not putting it down correctly on paper. All right, make sure you answer the question. Now I would like you, with your blue and red colored pencils, to draw these boxes with the appropriate colors, and we're going to kind of label the air masses that we would expect to see forming over these areas. So if we start here in the North Pacific, North Pacific has actually got some colder temperatures. So this is a maritime polar. It's forming over the ocean with colder temperatures. And that affects kind of the northwestern coast of the United States and up here along Canadian coast and into Alaska. The southern part of the Pacific Ocean, the temperatures are warmer. So this is the maritime tropical. This is going to come in and affect the southern coast of California, parts of the Baja Peninsula. This middle box is forming over Mexico. So if it's forming over land, it's continental and it's warm, so it's continental tropical. This usually comes and kind of hits the middle of the United States. Our last warm air mass forms over the Gulf of Mexico and moves into the Gulf states and also kind of moves up eventually. That's our maritime tropical air mass. So we have 2 locations where maritime tropical air masses could form. And these are not the only places where they could form. I want to make sure to point that out. We go up here to Canada and we look at these colder waters. That's going to be a maritime polar air mass that comes in and affects these provinces. Over here we have Canada. This is a continental polar air mass that brings its cold air down to the northwest, the mid northwest parts of the country. And then finally, up near the Arctic Ocean, we have our continental Arctic air masses that very rarely make their way down to the United States. All right. Also, please add to your diagram, air masses move slowly. They do not just go across the country. They're going to sit and build those characteristics and gradually work their way across the country. All right, make sure you answer the question, and we'll do more stuff tomorrow in class.